Welcome back. We've got the crank arm, the chain ring, and the race screwed on, but channel locks are the only tool I have big enough to fit on the two flat sides here to tighten it. So without boogering it up too much, I'm adjusted the channel locks to just fit on the flat sides here, and to turn it and tighten it without slipping, but just tight like that. Okay, so now we're going to get the frame and press the bearing cups into the frame. So the way to do that is to find what I've got there on the table, a block of wood or a panel of wood, so you don't booger up the metal and you have a flat surface. So with the flat surface and with the bearing cup, and there's not a right and a left on these, you can see that there's some corrosion where it looks like it sat and was corroded at the bottom. So I'm going to rotate it so that the corrosion's at the top, and then use a rubber mallet or a hammer. What happened to my rubber mallet? Oh, here we go. I have a rubber mallet here. If I only had a hammer, I would put another piece of wood here, but I've got a rubber mallet so it won't mar the metal. So we've stabilized this, kind of tap around so it goes in straight. And it will take some effort and you can hear the sound changes when it seats. And there we go. Same for the other side. Now there's a light coating of grease on here, and the idea is that this is a friction fit, that these two parts shouldn't move, so there should be not a lot of grease there. Again, there's some corrosion on one side, and setting it in the frame, and again the frame has been wiped. I wiped it with an oily rag. So, rubber mallet and stabilizing. So you don't want to get it off center. There we go. Okay. So the chain ring side, the drive side, is the right side. So we put the crank arm in. And this is kind of a trick. You get it in like that. All right, is how that's going to go. But remember, we need bearings. So the bearings have been greased and lubed. Bearings are going to go on there. I've got grease on here that I'm putting on the race. So we have a nice bead coating of grease on the race. This is where I like my toothpick as a tool to put a bead of grease all the way around. You know, if you had a toothpaste tube to squeeze it out, that's kind of what we're looking for, is, you know, about that much all the way around. So there's no metal on metal contact that there's always grease. Okay, so I've got the cage backwards because this is the closed side of the cage, and that would go against here. So I'm going to flip that around the correct way. That's how that sits on there. That side's ready. Now, in here, we also have to put that bead of grease. You can see that. Just like that. Okay. Da-da-da. And it spins. All right, so now the other side. Bead of grease. Lovely, lovely. Now you might have noticed that as I used the rubber mallet on the frame, some debris fell out. So we knew this bike, just by observation of its condition, had seen some water, probably down the seat tube, in the bottom bracket area for sure. There was water. That's probably why the chain didn't get included when it was shipped, because the chain was probably rusted. So we have a new chain, and I've got some of that rust knocked out of here, but we're not too worried about it. Why, you ask? Because rust never sleeps. It will always be there. We can slow it down, but as far as it wearing through the frame, yes, that can happen and cause fatigue, and that it would eventually fail. But we're not worried about that. Metal's thick, and should still last for another 30 to 50 years. Okay, so in we go. Again, bearings towards the cup. That's in the bottom bracket. And then the cone with the adjusting slots needs its bead of grease, just like that. No area is left untouched by grease. That is going to be touched by the ball bearings. That's the idea. And in the advanced assembly process, you would look at the components, you would look at the races, you would feel whether or not there are any gouges, and then you would determine whether or not within your budget you wanted to replace the components that were worn to a point that you felt you could afford to replace them. This is thick, hard steel. Doesn't seem to have a problem with wear, but I didn't actually feel it to see. I'm sure there's a little bit of wear on there. Now, again, this is the non-drive side, and so righty-tighty, lefty-loosey doesn't work. So we go left, and that is closing the gap between the race and the bearing. And down she goes. And the you can use your fingernails in these slots, and the crank will stop turning here when it gets to a certain point. There we go. And when I first did one of these, I used a screwdriver in that slot, and I had to figure out which way it needed to turn. So that was a trick, because I was just a kid. I could, kind of understand the difference between right-handed threads and left-handed threads, but it was still a mystery when just looking at it. I couldn't tell which way it went. All right. So when this is finger tight, and once we get it assembled, the adjustment comes much, much later, and that will be another video. Okay, so finger tight. Now we have a washer, and there are two because the components came together, headset and bearings, so one's thicker than the other, and I'm going to use the thick one for the bottom bracket here. It's got a slot in it, and it's called a key, and there's a the slot is in the bottom bracket crank arm, and the slot or the little key is in the washer. That fits just like that. So when the nut goes on here, it's spinning against the washer and not the race itself. So again, left is tight, and then we'll find a wrench when we go to do the adjustment, but we're just finger tightening for now. And while I've got the bike out of the stand, we'll go ahead and put the grease in the headset. So the headset here has been cleaned and now needs a bead of grease. And then when we get the fork all prepared, then that can be assembled. And I usually do that on the bike stand. But while I've got it out of here for you all to see, we'll just grease these guys up. And I'm glad you're sticking with me. Steven, it's going to be a nice bike. You keep it or give it away. It should last for a very long time, as long as it's not left out too long in the weather or gets too wet. All right, so there we go. Put this back in the bike stand. And we'll be ready for the next video. All right, thanks for watching. See you next time.